safe with regard to Omicron? Is it your sense that maybe this thing is over? You know, we had this false alarm I think it was July, maybe it was August. I'm pretty sure it was July of last year when President Biden came out and said, hey, it's Freedom Day. It was right around July 4th, in fact, now that I recall. And, you know, we thought, okay, it's like, you know, the horror show is over. And then came Delta, and then came Omicron, and then came, oh, my God. Well, here we are, a little short of a year later, 3 months short anyway. What, March, April, May, June, July, okay, we're a half a year later. and now, this fascinating reporting in the Associated Press, AP News, Carla Johnson is the reporter. The opening paragraph kind of says the whole thing. The Omicron wave that assaulted the United States this winter also bolstered our defenses, leaving enough protection against the coronavirus that future spikes will likely require much less, if any, dramatic disruption to society. And what they're talking about is that we are getting close to what may be necessary for herd immunity with COVID. Even though, you know, the many Americans have not been infected, the best estimate is that about 80 million Americans have already been infected one way or another with COVID. Now, the giant kicker here, the catch, you know, for all this, is that if you get COVID, nobody knows how long that immunity lasts, right? We are in the midst of this giant epidemiological experiment to find out, but nobody knows. And there are lots and lots of cases of people who got the original COVID, and then Delta came along and they got COVID all over again. Or they got Delta and then they got Omicron, or they got, you know, whatever. COVID appears to be more like its cousin, the common cold, which is also a coronavirus. It appears to be more like the common cold than like, you know, for example, measles or mumps or smallpox, where you get it once and you get immunity for the rest of your life. That is definitely not the case here. But what we don't know is getting COVID enough to keep you immune for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years? We just don't know. And if it turns out that it's less than a year, I mean, we know now that the vaccines are only good for about 6 months, and maybe even only 4 months, which might mean that we end up needing to get 3 shots a year, or at least 2 shots a year. I mean, I know that they're still debating all that right now, but they are saying a 4th shot if you're immune compromised. They haven't yet said a 4th shot if you're over 65, but I'm guessing that pretty soon that's going to be coming down the road, because we're coming up on the time when the early adopters, the people who got shots early on, are now, you know, probably 4 or 5 months out from their last booster. I know I got mine in October, so I'm thinking, you know, I should probably get another booster pretty soon. And I'm largely waiting for March or April for that, just to make sure. But the bottom line here is that between all the people who've gotten vaccinations, and that's, you know, fully vaccinated with boosters, I think it's around 56% of Americans, and at least 1 shot is around 70% of Americans, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. When actually, oh, here it is, 73%. That in addition to that, you've got Americans who have had an infection, even if they never got a shot at all, and they have some immunity from that. This is what scientists who deal with viruses and vaccines refer to as herd immunity. Now, we had with the Trump administration this wackadoodle doctor, you know, Ronnie, what's his name? The Trump's, they called him Dr. Feelgood in the White House, because he would pass out sleeping pills, and I don't know if he was passing out pain pills or not, but he was passing out sleeping pills and sedatives and tranquilizers and all kinds of stuff to anybody who wanted them. And in fact, somebody recently tweeted a picture of him, you know, just crashed out on the floor, looking rather stoned himself. He was talking about how we just need to get everybody in America infected so we can have herd immunity. And the problem, of course, with that was this was before there was a vaccine. And if everybody in America had gotten infected, we would have had probably between 3 and 4 million deaths. We're going to have 1 million deaths anyway. In fact, let me just go to trumpdeathtoll.org and see what our current, the trumpdeathtoll.org number right now is 928,518, which is pretty grim stuff. But what they're saying is, and COVID is still extremely dangerous. We're averaging right now about 130,000 infections a day. We're averaging around 2,000 deaths a day. The vast majority of them being people who are people who are unvaccinated, and the small minority of them being people who were vaccinated but had serious comorbidities, or they were on steroids, or they were on immune suppressive drugs, so the vaccine basically didn't take. But when you look at these numbers, this is scientists at the Johns Hopkins, this is from the AP story, right? Scientists at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health estimate that about 3 out of 4 people in the United States will have been infected by Omicron by the end of this surge. That's pretty mind-boggling. That includes, a lot of vaccinated people who get Omicron, don't even know that they had it in most cases. If you're vaccinated and you're exposed to Omicron, you may test positive for a week. You may be contagious, but you don't have any symptoms, or you have very mild symptoms like a sore throat. On the other hand, I had a caller a couple days ago who was vaccinated, boosted, and in good health, got COVID. Don't know if it's Omicron or Delta, and it just knocked them on their tailbone. I mean, just boom. They survived it. They don't seem to have long COVID. And then, of course, there's the long COVID problem. And we don't know how that plays out, and we don't know what role Omicron plays in that, and we don't know for sure whether vaccines will prevent that. I got my newsletter from Amy Vanderpool a couple of days ago. I think it was on Sunday. The Shero newsletter, S-H-E-R-O, like hero, S-H-E, hero, And it's a wonderful newsletter. I encourage you to subscribe to it. I think Amy's doing great work. But in her newsletter, she was talking about how she has long COVID. And it's so hard for her to even get the newsletter together. In fact, she wrote, "I'm crying as I type these words." It just broke my heart. So, we've got to be very, very careful of this thing. Particularly if you're over 65, if you have diabetes, if you have, chronic lung problems, if you're on any kind of immune suppressive drugs, whether it's for psoriasis or arthritis, or COPD or whatever. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of drugs that are used that suppress the immune system that therefore put you at higher risk of getting sick. So with that huge caveat, and noting, as they do in this AP story, that 80 million Americans are still unvaccinated and thus vulnerable who have not yet contracted COVID, and thus vulnerable to a next wave. They're saying, the 26% of Americans who could still get Omicron right now have to be very, very careful. What we are seeing is state after state saying, okay, we're going to get back to normal. And I got to tell you how I'm feeling about this. And, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not offering advice to anybody. I'm just telling you my perspective. I'm curious to hear yours. And that is that when I've had another booster, a couple weeks after I've had another booster, so that because I'm reading all this stuff about how after 4 months the boosters have faded by as much as 70%. So I'm not feeling completely safe right now. Here we are in February. By March, I will definitely not be feeling safe since I got my booster in October. But a couple of weeks after I've had my next booster, and I've never had Omicron, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to feel fine going into the restaurants here in Portland. And there's a website that compiles a list of these, but OpenTable even has now a little click box. I only want to go to restaurants that require proof of vaccination to get in. And those are the only kinds of restaurants that I will patronize going forward. But there's a bunch of them in town, and some of them are really great restaurants. I am really looking forward to going back and having a meal in a restaurant and having a drink with dinner and, all that kind of stuff that is just like, the old, and Louise and I, it's what little recreation has been left to us, right? And so I'm looking forward to this thing winding down. Here in Oregon, our mask-free date has been set as April 1st. A Governor Kate Brown has come out recently and said, you know, we might do this earlier than that because we're probably going to be one of the last states in the union to still have a mask mandate. As I mentioned earlier, Governor Newsom, we don't have the details yet, but Governor Newsom has announced that he is going to be announcing that California is going to transition into the, okay, we're now in the post-COVID phase. The big challenge that people like Governor Newsom and Governor Brown here in Oregon have is the hospitals. You know, we could say tomorrow, okay, you know, we've got herd immunity for all practical purposes. It's not spreading as badly as it was. I mean, it still is, right? 130,000 infections a day. It's still a big deal. But by and large, among the vaccinated community and among the people who have already had infections, in their minds, this pandemic is pretty much over. And yes, we're going to continue to have, particularly in rural areas, people getting sick and dying from COVID. But let's get past the surge in the hospital right now, which is the tail end of the Delta and the Omicron surge. And that's probably going to resolve itself in about a month because the hospitals and the hospitalizations and deaths tend to follow the illness or the wave hitting the state, tend to follow them by about a month. And thus my March-April prognostication. That, you know, this is, we're looking at seriously getting back to normal. And I think that's like something that we should celebrate, that we should give Joe Biden a hell of a lot of credit for. When he came into office, there was no plan in place to vaccinate everybody in the United States. Donald Trump left him a complete disaster. Yeah, Trump started Operation Warp Speed, which got us one vaccine, the Moderna vaccine. But the Pfizer vaccine, which appears to be the gold standard, came out of Germany. But you know, Biden has done an amazing job, just an amazing job in this country, and really deserves credit for it. So, anyhow, bottom line here, you know, how are you going to be treating this? Your thoughts on that? And the other thing is, we want to get kids vaccinated. The pulling the vaccine on the 2 to 5 year olds, that was a blow. Particularly for those of us with children or grandchildren.